I complimented her body, and the alien Seductress began to undress. First contact. The hydroponics lab aboard Space Station Celestia hummed with the gentle sounds of filtration systems and growth accelerators. Elias Mercer adjusted the spectrum lights over his experimental Terran-Martian hybrid orchids, lost in the satisfying routine of measuring growth patterns. 6 months into his 3-year botanical research mission, he'd grown accustomed to the sterile environment that was now more home than the Earth he'd left behind. "They respond well to your touch," came a melodious voice from the doorway. Elias turned, nearly dropping his calibration tool. Standing at the entrance was a figure unlike any he'd seen during his time on the International Station. Her skin was a luminous purple that seemed to catch the artificial light like amethyst, with delicate iridescent patterns tracing her temples. Dark violet-black hair fell in elaborate braids past her shoulders, adorned with what appeared to be living crystals that pulsed with gentle light. "I'm Nilara, diplomatic envoy from Lyria," she said, approaching with graceful movements that suggested the slightly lower gravity of her homeworld. "I arrived with the delegation this morning." Elias composed himself, extending his hand before realizing she might not know the human greeting. "Elias Mercer, lead botanist. I didn't realize anyone would be interested in the hydroponics section." Nilara's eyes, a striking silver with vertical pupils, studied the plants with genuine interest. "On Lyria, we believe that understanding a species' relationship with their flora reveals much about their civilization." "A philosophy I can appreciate," Elias replied, surprised by her insight. "These orchids are particularly challenging. They require precise conditions. Yet they thrive under your care," she observed, leaning closer to examine the delicate blooms. "You have remarkable intuition for their needs." The compliment caught him off guard, coming from someone who clearly possessed a sophisticated understanding of botanical science. "Thank you. It's taken years to develop." Nilara smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like polished pearl. "Perhaps you could show me more of your work. Lyrian botanical sciences differ greatly from Earth's approaches." "I'd be honored," Elias found himself saying, unexpectedly drawn to her curiosity. "Though I should warn you, most humans find my enthusiasm for plant hybridization rather dull." "I assure you, Elias," she replied, her voice carrying a warm undertone that sent an unexpected shiver through him. "I find passion for one's expertise anything but dull." She moved beside him to examine the growth charts on his tablet, her arm nearly brushing his. The subtle fragrance that surrounded her reminded him of night-blooming jasmine, with an exotic undertone he couldn't identify. "You know," Elias said, finding courage in her evident interest, "your understanding of botanical interconnection is impressive. Most visitors see only plants, not the complex systems they represent." Nilara's expression softened, her purple skin seeming to glow more intensely. "A thoughtful observation. Perhaps there's more interconnection to explore than just between species of plants." The implication in her words hung in the air between them, a seed of possibility neither had expected to plant that day on a space station floating between worlds. Our cultural exchange a week later, Elias adjusted the collar of his dress uniform as he approached the diplomatic reception hall. The invitation from Nilara had been unexpected. A formal gathering of representatives from 7 planetary systems wasn't typical territory. For a research botanist, the door slid open to reveal a space transformed. Holographic constellations drifted across the ceiling, recreating the night skies from each delegate's homeworld. Elias recognized Earth's familiar patterns, but his eyes were drawn to an unfamiliar violet nebula that must represent Lyria's system. "You found your way," Nilara's voice came from behind him. Turning, Elias momentarily lost his composure. Her formal attire consisted of flowing fabrics that shifted color with her movements, from deep indigo to brilliant violet. Crystalline structures adorned her neck and wrists, complementing the natural luminescence of her skin. "I'm feeling rather out of place," he admitted. "My expertise is in plant communication, not interplanetary diplomacy." Nilara's silver eyes crinkled with amusement. "An advantage, perhaps. Most here speak without truly communicating." She gestured toward the gathering. "Come, let me introduce you as my cultural advisor." Throughout the evening, Elias observed Nilara in her element, navigating complex political tensions with graceful ease. She seamlessly translated cultural nuances for him, occasionally brushing her fingers against his arm to direct his attention. The Zentari ambassador believes plants are simply decorative, she whispered during one conversation. Imagine limiting your understanding so severely. Elias laughed. On Earth, we spent centuries thinking plants were inactive objects rather than communicative beings. Your species learns and adapts, she replied thoughtfully. It's an admirable quality. As the reception wound down, Nylara led him to a quieter alcove overlooking the station's exterior view of distant stars. I'd like to show you something from my culture, she said, standing before him. It's a traditional greeting between those who wish to know one another beyond formal boundaries. May I? At his nod, she placed her palms gently against his, their fingers aligning. The contact sent a surprising warmth through his skin, and her purple complexion seemed to pulse with subtle light. Our people believe in the honest exchange of energy, she explained, her voice softer. What humans might call intention or feeling. Elias felt an unexpected sensation, like static electricity but pleasant, flowing between their connected hands. Her eyes held his with an intensity that made him acutely aware of their proximity. And what intention are you sharing now? He asked, his voice unexpectedly hoarse. Nylara stepped closer, the space between them charged with unspoken possibility. Curiosity, she whispered. Interest. And perhaps something more that doesn't translate well between our worlds. When their hands finally parted, Elias knew something fundamental had shifted between them, something that transcended diplomatic protocol and scientific collaboration. Tomorrow, she said, would you show me your special project in the botanical gardens? I'd like to see what you're passionate about. The invitation carried layers of meaning that neither could pretend to misunderstand. Hidden chambers. The botanical gardens occupied the station's outermost ring, where reinforced transparent panels offered unobstructed views of space. Elias led Nylara past the main research areas to a smaller, private growing chamber he'd been granted for personal projects. Most of my colleagues focus on practical applications, food production, oxygen generation, he explained, keying in his access code. This is something different. The door slid open to reveal a lush environment unlike the orderly rows in the main laboratory. Here, plants from a dozen worlds grew in a carefully orchestrated ecosystem, some luminescent, others moving subtly as they sensed the newcomers. It's beautiful, Nylara breathed, her purple skin reflecting the bioluminescent glow of European water lilies. You've created harmony between species that evolved light years apart. Elias watched her expression, finding greater satisfaction in her appreciation than in years of academic recognition. The project started as an experiment in cross-species communication. These plants have learned to share resources rather than compete. Much like what we're attempting through diplomacy, she observed, gently touching a feathery frond that curled responsively around her finger. Though perhaps the plants are more successful. They spent an hour exploring the garden, Elias explaining each specimen's native environment while Nylara shared surprising insights about similar flora on distant worlds. Their hands occasionally brushed as they examined plants together, each contact lingering longer than necessary. You've shared your sanctuary with me, Nylara said eventually. Would you allow me to reciprocate? 20 minutes later, they stood inside Nylara's private quarters. Unlike the utilitarian human living spaces, her room was transformed with artifacts that seemed alive, crystalline structures that hummed with subtle energy, fabric wall hangings that shifted patterns like liquid, and atmospheric adjustments that created a slightly heavier gravity and more humid air. These are remarkable, Elias said, examining a collection of what appeared to be translucent stones on a floating shelf. Memory crystals, she explained, standing close beside him. They hold impressions of important moments and emotions. When she picked one up, it glowed with increasing intensity, responding to her touch. This holds memories of my home forests during the auroral season. She hesitated, then held it toward him. Would you like to see? Rather than taking the crystal, Elias gently wrapped his fingers around her hand that held it. The connection sent an immediate rush of sensation, the crystal's images flowing into his mind, but intermingled with a warm awareness of Nylara's presence, her emotions becoming temporarily accessible to him. He saw violet skies filled with rippling light, felt the sensation of warm rain on skin, experienced the profound connection to a world utterly alien, yet suddenly intimate. But more powerful was the awareness of Nylara's feelings, her loneliness on the station, her growing fascination with him, and underneath it all, a yearning that mirrored his own. When the vision faded, they stood closer than before, her free hand now resting against his chest. "That was," he began, unable to find adequate words. "I know," she whispered, her silver eyes meeting his. "There are some things that transcend language barriers." The space between them disappeared as she leaned forward, her lips finding his in an exploratory kiss that sent shivers of electric connection through both of them. Stellar confessions. The station-wide alert pierced through the intimacy of their moment, harsh red lights pulsing as the automated system announced, "Gravitational anomaly detected. All personnel report to designated safety zones." Elias and Nylara pulled apart, the urgency of the situation immediately shifting their focus. "My gardens," he said, concern flooding his voice. "The specimens will be destroyed if the environmental systems fail." "The diplomatic wing has independent backup systems," Nylara replied, already moving toward the door. "We can reroute power to your laboratory." They navigated the corridors against the flow of personnel heading toward the central hub, Nylara's diplomatic clearance giving them access to restricted maintenance pathways. Inside the control room adjacent to the botanical section, displays flashed with warning indicators. "The station's caught in some kind of spatial distortion," Elias explained, scanning the readouts. "Main power is being diverted to stabilize our position." Nylara moved to a secondary console, her fingers dancing across the unfamiliar human interface with surprising dexterity. "Lyrian ships encounter similar phenomena near quantum rifts. If I can access the station's external sensors, working in seamless coordination, they established a power bypass for the botanical chambers." When a junction panel exploded in a shower of sparks, Nylara pushed Elias aside, her quick reflexes saving him from serious injury though leaving her arm with a painful burn. "You're hurt," he said, guiding her to sit while retrieving a medical kit. "It's minor," she insisted, though her purple skin had darkened around the injury. "Lyrians heal quickly." As he carefully treated her wound, the station's vibrations gradually subsided and the alert level downgraded from emergency to caution. In the relative quiet that followed, a new intimacy formed between them, born of crisis and cooperation rather than physical attraction. "You risked yourself for my work," Elias said softly, finishing the bandage. "Why?" Nylara's silver eyes met his, vulnerability visible in their depths. "Because I understand what it means to nurture something across impossible distances, to care for what others might consider insignificant." Her uninjured hand rose to touch his face. "On Lyria, we believe that what one chooses to protect reveals the truth of their soul." The confession hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully acknowledged until now. "When I first saw you in my lab," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I told myself my interest was professional, scientific curiosity about your species, your knowledge." His fingers gently traced the patterns along her temple. "I've stopped pretending that's all it is. Diplomatic relations between our worlds are carefully regulated," she responded, a hint of sadness in her tone. "Attachments between species are complicated." "Is that why you brought me to the reception? To remind us both of the boundaries?" Nylara's laugh was soft and musical. "I brought you because in a room full of the galaxy's most important beings, you were the only one I wanted beside me." Her eyes held a gleam of mischief. "Boundaries exist to be understood, Elias, sometimes to be respected, and sometimes to be transcended." The station's systems hummed back to normal operation around them, but neither moved to leave. Something fundamental had shifted, a gravitational pull between them that rivaled the anomaly outside. "My diplomatic mission concludes in 17 days, Nylara said, her voice carrying both promise and question. Elias took her hands in his, careful of her injury. "Then we have 17 days to determine what exists between an Earth botanist and Illyrian diplomat when all the pretenses stripped away." The way she leaned forward to kiss him again suggested she already knew the answer. Beyond boundaries. The observation deck stood empty at this late hour, the station's lighting dimmed to simulate night. Beyond the reinforced viewports, The vastness of space provided both majestic vista and somber reminder of the distance that would soon separate them. Nilara's departure shuttle was scheduled for 0800 hours, ending their brief, unexpected convergence of worlds. "I've received approval for a research extension," Elias said, breaking the contemplative silence as they stood side by side. 6 months studying the adaptive flora on the Lyrian northern continent. Nilara's purple skin brightened with surprise, the natural luminescence that had become so dear to him intensifying. "You're coming to Lyria? When was this decided?" "I submitted the request the day after the anomaly incident," he admitted. "I received confirmation this morning. I wanted it to be certain before I told you." She turned fully toward him, silver eyes searching his. "And is this decision based on botanical interest or something else?" "The botanical justification is genuine," he replied with a small smile, "but insufficient to explain my motivation. The past 2 weeks had transformed them both. What began as curiosity had evolved through shared experiences, quiet evenings in his gardens, mornings spent in her quarters as she taught him rudimentary Lyrian language, and stolen moments of increasing intimacy in the spaces between their official duties. "My position on Lyria is complicated," she said, though her hands reached for his. "The diplomatic corps has strict protocols about interspecies relations. I'm coming as a scientist, not as your—" He paused, realizing they had never defined what existed between them. "My what, Elias Mercer?" she asked, a teasing lilt in her voice as she stepped closer. The familiar scent of her skin, like night-blooming flowers and exotic spice, enveloping him. Instead of answering with words, he pulled her gently against him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that had become as essential as breathing. Her body responded immediately, the luminescent patterns across her skin brightening as they always did when her emotions intensified. "The term doesn't matter," he whispered against her mouth. "Whatever exists between us defies simple categorization." Nilara guided him backward until they reached the small alcove beyond the main viewing area, hidden from casual observation. Her fingers traced the contours of his face with a tenderness that made his heart ache. "In 17 standard days," she murmured, "I will meet you at the northern spaceport on Lyria. Until then—" Words gave way to touch as her hands moved beneath his uniform jacket, each contact sending waves of connection that transcended physical sensation, a uniquely Lyrian intimacy he had come to treasure. He responded in kind, his fingers tracing the sensitive patterns along her shoulders that made her silver eyes flutter closed. Their final night together unfolded in a dance of discovery they had perfected over 2 brief weeks, human warmth meeting Lyrian energy in harmonious exchange. Every touch carried promises for their future, every whispered endearment a bridge across the stars that would temporarily separate them. Later, as station dawn approached and their time dwindled, they lay intertwined in the viewing alcove, the galaxies spinning beyond them. "I once told you that Lyrians believe what we choose to protect reveals our soul," Nilara said softly, her head resting against his chest. "What I didn't tell you is what we believe about souls themselves." "And what's that?" Elias asked, memorizing the weight of her against him. "That they form across lifetimes and distances," she replied. "That when 2 beings connect as we have, it isn't chance but recognition." As the station's lights gradually brightened, signaling approaching day and their imminent parting, Elias held this truth between them, that what had begun with a simple compliment in a botanical laboratory had blossomed into something that would endure across the vast distances between their worlds. Not an ending, but a pause in an ongoing journey that would continue on the surface of a planet, circling a distant purple star, where new discoveries awaited them both.